Hi guys, just wanted to do a quick video recording, just have a bit of a general sort of catch-up, give some general advice and feedback on some of the images, have a look at where everybody's at so far, just to try and push things forward and keep you guys involved and give you our thoughts so you get a good idea of what we think is working in these images, what we think could be improved. And I'm going to do this kind of in the same way that we would have a daily session when we do these sort of things in feature film. We submit our work regularly for daily sessions where they're viewed by the supervisors, and we'll get just general feedback and notes. So I wanted to do that, so don't be upset if I'm a bit blunt with some of the feedback. It's not because I don't like the work, it's just trying to get across as plainly as possible exactly what I think could be improved. So, and I'll do a little bit of comparison between some of the matte paintings as well and some of the camera moves and such, because some of them are obviously more successful in some areas than others, but all of them have got things that work, so it'll be good to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting, just so we can talk about that. And because probably you notice as you're working and you're seeing other people's results that sometimes certain things seem to work well in other people's paintings that you then try and bring back into your work, but sometimes it's hard to pin down exactly what somebody's doing that's managed to make their work seem more successful. So we'll just cover some of those sort of things, and hopefully some of these notes will just bring a few things into your mind, give you some ideas as you go forward. So I'm going to have a look at the camera moves as well. So what I've done just to prep is just bring in the matte paintings. I've got Manu's, Jan's, Pino's, Marco and Daniel that we'll have a look at, and I'm just going to ad-lib this. I've not prepared anything in advance or had a good look at the images, so I'm just going to kind of, I know I've seen some of these before obviously on the forum, but I'm just going to kind of wing it and give you some general feedback, the first things that come to my mind, because that's probably going to be the most useful. So I'll get started with Manu here. Really nice looking image. It's quite well progressed now. You've got photo elements that work pretty well. The scale's looking pretty good. First thing I notice is the saturation seems to be a little bit, everything seems to be a little bit muted, a little bit greyed out when you compare to the Man of Steel image. We seem to be carrying a little bit more saturation through this. Obviously this has been through a DI, the digital intermediate process, that happens after all the visual effects work and the film is completed. It'll be run through the DI, and then it gets some of the saturation gets played around with, some of the contrast levels and general values in the shot get adjusted at the DI stage, and you tend to find that if you compare the final visual effects shots with the shots that make it into the film, everything tends to have got a little bit more contrasty, a bit more punchy as it goes through the DI, sometimes a little bit more saturated as well, or just, you know, have the colours shifted around a touch to make everything work in the context of the story, which we don't always have a total eye on when we're doing visual effects. Obviously it plays into our work, but we don't always have the full view of everything, so, you know, at DI stage they can adjust things a little bit. But yes, there is a little bit more saturation, a little bit of warmth in here that would be great to get back into this, particularly in the foreground, I think, because it's quite nice to have it fall off to something a bit cooler, and we can see that even here it falls off to being a bit more muted and cool, but we're just keeping some of the slightly warmer tones and a bit more saturation in the foreground, which adds a lot of depth through the shot if you've got that kind of warmth in the foreground that falls off to the cooler background. So the rock elements that you're using down here do have some kind of blue tones and some orangey tones going in here, some browner tones. So I just make sure that everything's staying consistent, because this feels quite nice. You know, the lighting and stuff is working fairly successfully on here, even if it's a little bit desaturated. But in here it looks as if we're getting a little bit of range even within the one element. So just have a look and make sure you can bring everything into one world. In fact, this element bothers me a little bit in general. I think it's kind of the one part of this where I'm struggling to exactly make out the form. It's not quite as descriptive as everything else. Everything else is a little bit easier to read, and this is a little bit tougher to kind of get a grip on exactly the scale of the element, or, you know, just looking at this purely as a painting at the moment before we have a look at the shot. It's kind of hard to get a read on exactly how big that is, exactly what it is that we're looking at. So I would maybe take another look at this element and see if you can find something that's going to work a little bit better for you. The kind of framing that you've got here with the darker elements that kind of hug the sides of the frame and almost create this kind of natural vignette, I think that's a really nice idea. That's something that we use a lot in film. You know, we kind of keep some of those darker elements that drop away to the corners so that it draws your eye through the shot. It's a nice sort of compositional way of doing that without it being too obvious. Just be careful of repetition. It looks like I can see some similar shapes going on, and again, it's possible that those won't be visible in the shot. Well, you know, I might be doing a disservice here. And if it's not visible in the shot, you don't worry about it. You discard that. But yeah, just be careful that any repetition that's obvious like that you try and paint that out and just remove it. And just talking about the levels in this at the moment, and this falls away to being very dark here, to the point where it's almost difficult to kind of see any detail in the blacks down here. But I think in general there's maybe everything's feeling a little bit lifted overall in this compared to the Man of Steel shot. Now, you might think I'm contradicting myself a little bit there, because I have said to try and carry in the painting a little bit more detail in these shadow areas than we might see in the final shot, and then grade a little bit of that out in the final comp, which I think is a good idea. But here we really can see a lot, and it almost feels like we can just afford to, particularly in areas like this and down in the bottom, in the bottom of the canyon here, we can just afford to lose more of the details, because they do look like some of these elements are carrying a little bit too much lighting, so they feel like a relit, an element that was sort of stronger lit and has been graded down. I think if you can knock a bit more of that lighting out and just flatten it off a bit and darken it so it gets a bit sort of some deeper blacks into the base here, I think that is going to help, and it's going to reinforce your lighting, because it's kind of, you have got this area is working well because you've kind of got the strong lighting and these kind of sharp rock forms, so it plays up really nicely. I think you can afford to lose a lot of detail here just so that it's obvious that that's really falling into shadow, and then in areas like this it's kind of hard to define exactly. I mean, having the softer lighting because it's evening is quite nice, but having it read slightly more obviously where your light is hitting the tops of these and where it's falling off, I think would be good, because like for areas like this it's very hard to say exactly whether this is receiving direct light here and then sort of falling off, and where exactly does it stop being hit by the direct light. So I think having a look at things like that will be good, because you've still got this river running through, which is a great compositional device, by the way, especially leading into this V. That works really well. I think that sort of reflective surface of the water, the white surface, will reflect a lot of the cooler tones in the sky, so you can afford to keep a little bit more brightness in something like that. And I think that will really work if you just sort of lose a lot of the stuff going on here, let it fall off to be a bit darker. Don't lose it totally. You want the sense that there's some texture there, but having it fall off a bit, I think, is good. And then depth-wise, I think you can do a bit more work. I mean, there's some quite strong little highlights that are popping out here and there that you maybe need to address, because I think as well as your shadow tones needing to be just all brought into one world, I think your highlights do as well. I mean, it's great that you've got these kind of hot highlights here, and that falls nicely on that third. It's a kind of a nice compositional element in there. I think it works well. I think then it just becomes a case of trying to balance the rest of the highlights and shadows as we go back into the shot in the same way as you've got them here, because this is sort of, to me, is the more obviously successful area in the shot. In terms of some of these shapes, some of them look a little bit unnatural. You'll probably call me out on that and say, no, it came from one photo reference, so it's totally natural. But sometimes just erring on the side of caution and picking an element that's slightly less exaggerated, because even though we do find some of those things in nature where they kind of surprise you and you think, wow, okay, I'm surprised that's real. Steering slightly clear of those and going for things that maybe are slightly more what you'd expect to see is sometimes kind of going to be useful for you. watch areas like this, because you've got some highlights in here, but they're being sort of pulled down. It almost looks like an element that was very brightly lit in here that's being pulled down, and could do with having something more like this, where you've got a little bit of detail carried into the lighting. It almost looks like it was some sort of slightly clipped and then being pulled down. So I think maybe just have a look at your highlight tones here, pick a highlight tone for here, and pick a highlight tone for back here. If we have one, maybe we've totally fallen off. Maybe we don't see any of that key light back there at that stage. But and just try and make sure that you've got this kind of nice transition from the sort of warmer, hot highlights in the front that fall off to the more muted, cooler tones, and do it in a kind of nice, natural fashion. Everything's. I mean, the sky's working well in here. It looks as if it's quite nicely placed, and you've got some things breaking the cloud, which is good. You've got some of the cloud then breaking over the top of your planets, which is really nice. I think you can afford to go a little bit stronger with the rim lighting on the planets, because that will only help to reinforce your light source. And with something that's right back here, it'd be great to feel that edge on those a little bit more as a crescent in here. I think that will just help to reinforce your lighting. Although I do like some of the texture work that you've got going on in the surfaces. That is reading really nicely, and it's just subtle enough that you kind of notice it, but it's not popping out too much. But yeah, I think if we play up the crescent a little bit, that's going to help. So that's about it. That's sort of the main things I noticed. So yeah, color temperature, just keep the warmth. Watch some of your elements, like this front one, and maybe these guys here, where it's kind of hard to tell. They almost look like vegetation, but don't look to be receiving the same strong light as something like this. Just keep an eye on any elements that aren't working, and be harsh about it. Cull anything that isn't working as well. Making sure your highlights and shadows are all reading quite nicely, and they're a bit clearer. If we go back to the Man of Steel shot for a second, you can see that lighting does kind of fall off softly into the valley there, but all the way back you've got these kind of clear light and shadow areas, light, and then you get the little touches of shadow in the background as well. Obviously it gets more flat as we go back, but here we've got the clear light and shadow sides, and then in here obviously we've got the same thing again. So try and get that just so that it's reading really well and falls off in the kind of same way that we've got this sort of falling off into the valley, because that'll just help keep our eye travelling through the shot, and not get too caught up in all this massive detail that's going on down here. Good to start with the detail, but yeah, you can afford to lose some along the way. So just before we move on, I'll just have a quick look at the actual shot. So I'm just going to bring this in. There we go. So I think the camera move's working really well in this. It feels very natural. It's kind of got a nice kind of swing to it. It feels like something that's could have been shot from a helicopter and resped, which is often the way that it's done in feature film. They'll often shoot a helicopter element, but helicopter elements, when you're going through a large environment, actually are quite slow. So sometimes they will be resped before any of the visual effects work is done, just so you get a bit of a faster reveal, and you're not hanging around for having to have a sort of 20-30 second shot when you could tell everything you needed to say in a 3 or 4 or 5 second shot. So this feels like a good length, good sort of show reel length. The parallax is all looking good. This element maybe is a bit too foreground. I feel like you could afford to push that back a bit. We're getting a lot of parallax here, and then nothing in this sort of middle gap between the two. So I think it'd be nice almost to keep this real foreground piece and then just push this one back a little bit so there's a bit less parallax. But in general, the parallax feels as if it's falling off nicely. It becomes a bit more obvious when you look at this. I'm just going to check this against the matte painting. Yeah, I think we're the same. It feels like you can afford to get a little bit more depth. It sort of feels like the edge of the world a little bit here. I think if you can add a few more peaks that are just visible in the distance, just falling off, maybe 1 or 2 more layers will just help that transition from the land into the sky. And what you'll often find in these kind of duskier, hazier environments is that you just get a kind of a darkening just as we get down onto the horizon. It just gets a little bit darker and duskier, along the horizon. So maybe you could use something like that to your advantage as well, so that it feels like we haven't got land elements slapped on top of a different sky. We just feel like it transitions off into the sky nicely. That's about all there is to say on that. I think the camera move's working really well. I think it's really successful. I think it's going to look like a great shot once it's finished up. I think the main work that you've got to do is just to try and make sure that all the matte painting is working really well, and all your elements are reading clearly. And I think you're going to have a great shot once you've finished all that work. So there's not too much else to say on that. I think I think that's about it. So let's move on to the next shot. So the next one I have here is Jan. Okay, so the matte painting is still kind of work in progress again, obviously. But in this case you've still got little bits of sketch and other bits where you've started getting more photo reference in there and texturing it up. I think this is possibly the most successful of the matte paintings in terms of the overall feel, matching the Man of Steel shot fairly well. In fact, dare I say it, I actually really like the way that you framed this with the darker elements, almost a little bit more than the Man of Steel shot. This kind of never felt totally natural to me in the Man of Steel shot, but I kind of couldn't quite justify the same light source on this as the background elements. Never quite worked, but I think what you have is working really well in here. The obvious thing to say straight away is as you work this up with your photo elements, just be careful of your highlight tones and shadow tones. I mean, your shadow tones actually look as if they're working really well. Where you've sketched in some of these elements, I know these are just placeholders, just make sure that your highlights are staying consistent and that they fall off well to the background. But everything's looking really good here. I think it's just a case of finishing things up. There is a bit of dead space down here. I would suggest trying to do something in here. Either have it fall off so that you don't read the transition as much between these elements, have it kind of fall off into a darker edge of the frame, or just try and fill it up with something. But it is going to need some sort of texture. I don't think you want to be looking down here. You certainly don't want to do anything that's going to draw the eye. But yeah, to do something just to, because at the moment the sort of harsh transition between the two, or that real extreme depth transition, is sort of catching the eye a little bit. There's really not a whole lot to add. I think you're moving in the right direction. The composition looks nice. I think with the camera move, this will give a nice reveal. I think it's just a case of really keeping on pushing this. Start working all this up with photo elements now. Just bring it all to a finish. I think some of these planet elements look as if they could use a bit more work. Though, if you could get a little bit of that textural quality that Manu's managed to bring into some of his planets, I think your crescents are working well to reinforce the light source. But maybe just bringing a little bit of texture into those will just help them to not feel too transparent. I think is the problem there. The color palette looks good. Not too much to say. The depth is working well. It kind of falls off nicely here. Careful you're not getting too cool. Maybe getting a little bit too blue back here, considering that the sky is quite warm and the rocks are quite warm. But it is nice that it falls off to a slightly cooler finish anyway. So I think this is going to be a case of really just keeping on working this up with photo elements until you've got a really nice finish on it. I'm just going to bring in, I think I have open here your latest projection test as well. So I think this is the last version as far as we've seen it, and obviously this reveals a little bit more of the environment, which again is working well. I mean, we've got a nice reveal here. I think having this maybe come back to just so that by the end of the shot, this canyon element is just disappears onto roughly around that sort of third on the image. So if I a bit of black at the end of the shot, bear with me while I just try and stop this at the end. So yeah, I think it'd be nice if we kind of felt like this just disappeared off into the sort of sky here and didn't maybe disappear right off the edge of frame, so that we feel like we've got the reveal of where that disappears to. I think that something like that would be quite nice. In the final comp, I can really see this working, kind of flaring out of the sun across the image as we get the nice reveal. The canyon's working as a good compositional device. The camera move itself, I think, could use some work. It feels very fast at the moment. It feels like you could do with everything you have is working, and I think the reveal is good. It almost feels like that needs to be a shot that's at least twice as long. I think I made some comments alluding to the same thing in your thread on the forum, but it definitely feels as though the camera move is a little bit wild. It could just do with being controlled a bit, taking some of the wobble out. Just again, check out some real heli plates from places like the Grand Canyon and those sort of areas, and you can see the sort of level of movement that's in a real helicopter plate, and just sort of try and emulate that, and you'll see the sort of natural little bounces and corrections that cameras make as they're going, and just try and get that sort of feel into this camera move, because I think at the moment the camera move is feeling a lot more CG than the matte painting, and it'd be great to have everything tie together well. I think that's about it. The only other thing that I noticed looking at this is that perhaps there's it feels a little bit lifted where we're dropping off into the canyon. It's nice to have that not being too deep and dark, because obviously you want to sell your depth, but I think you can afford to go a little bit darker than that in the base of the canyon just to get that strong read on it, because it just feels a little bit lifted in there compared to here where the light's occluded. It's getting all very dark, and that maybe just feels as though it wouldn't be getting as much bounce in there as something like this, where you're going to get more fill from the sky, because that's dropping off really steeply. It'd be good to see that get a little bit darker in there, because that area just feels a little bit muddy. But yeah, I'm nitpicking, but that's kind of, I think, what's going to serve best here. So yeah, I mean, parallax works well. All the elements feel quite nice. Again, similar to Manu, you're going to have to do a bit of work on those models to make sure that there's enough detail in them, because they are coming very foreground. But I think this is doable. I think it's looking perfectly good. Yeah, again, this one also is on its way to being a really nice shot. So keep working it up, and focus on getting all those photo elements in, and stay true to the sketch, because the sketch is working well. All the elements that you've got in there are working well, so try and stay true to that as you work it up, which I know can be hard sometimes, but I think you have a really nice overall feel here. Alright, so next we have Pino. So Pino, you've again sort of taken the approach similar to Manu, who's got a lot of his photo elements in there already. So you've got a lot of these rock elements in there, and I think it's off to a great start. I think what would serve well for you is something that I suggested to a couple of other people on the forum as well, is to maybe just try and suggest a slightly higher camera angle, so that we get, because what you have here, the way these sort of mountain ridges end against the sky, feels about right for a slightly lower camera angle. I think if you were to suggest a slightly higher camera angle, where we see a bit more of these ridges disappearing off into a horizon that's a bit higher up, and then shift the sky to compensate, I think that would serve well. In this case, it would just give a lot more depth to the shot. But the depth that you have is working. It just feels like we could use 2, 3, 4 more layers of that before we hit the sky, because we've got these really strong silhouettes at the moment. It'd be nice to feel those stacked back into the distance. The textures that you have look good. Be careful of light sources. Here, I think you would only get, if you were going to see any lighting at all on an element like this, it would be a really strong edge rim light. So try not to have those coming too far into the faces. When you see faces like this that are getting light all the way across them, it just makes it feel like it's a light source that was somewhere over here. So just try and have a look at some plates where you've got things like Grand Canyons or rocky environments that are strongly backlit, and just have a look at what point, how far away do we have to get from the light source before we start seeing the edge light. Because obviously if you're right over the top of the light source, you're not going to see any of the rim lighting on the rock elements at all. You're just going to see a silhouette. So have a look at that and just assess how far away you get from the light source before you do start seeing the little edge catches on the rock, and then obviously how far across you need to get before you start seeing the real full faces getting the light. Because again here that feels maybe as if it's just a bit too full face lit. I think you can work a bit more form into this, because you've got kind of light falling across the whole of that front face. I think if you were to break this and have some areas that where you basically feel a transition between some of the edges that are catching the light, and then, I mean, this works quite well where you've got the deeper shadow in here, but I think you can extend your shadow areas. So you've got like whole sections back here that fall into shadow where some of the rocks are going to be casting shadow onto itself. And you can probably afford to just break the silhouette of something like this a little bit more as well, just to stop it being too much of a simple hulking form. I think you can afford to pull in maybe one more foreground element, just framing off this side and using some of the space up in the top section of the shot. It's something that could probably, once you get your camera move in there, could probably disappear out of frame pretty quickly, so you wouldn't have to worry too much about the parallax, because it would, I could see it sort of disappearing within the first second of the shot, so you'd only have to make it work for 24 frames, but something just to give some parallax against this element. And then in here, I think this isn't reading particularly well against these background mountains, because you've got the shape of them, the line at the back here almost runs one straight into the other, and the only clue we've got of this being a separate element to this is the fact that the values here change, and they don't change all that much. I mean, I like the change. I think it looks about right for the depths, but I think if you had this as a very different silhouette to this background element, I think that would really help you. It's just going to help add separation to these, because I think if you have two overlapping elements that create a tangent like that, it's always a bit hard to read the depth. And obviously, during the shot, it would only line up like that at a certain point, but if you can break that in the matte painting to start with, you're always going to give yourself a bit of a better chance for creating that nice depth. Not too much else to say. I think keep working on it. But I think if you do sort of try and suggest a slightly higher camera, also what would be good is to try and get some of the sense of a canyon floor in there, which some of the other guys have done. So have a look at them and see how they've handled it, and see how you could do that sort of thing. But that would be really cool, just so that we feel like these aren't just 2D planes that all come up from a floor that's out of the shot. It'd be great if you could at some point get the sense of seeing something that actually connects to a floor that disappears back to the horizon. It's just going to reinforce the perspective, because in natural environments like this, although they don't have as obvious a perspective as cityscape shots like we looked at in the first workshop, they still do have a perspective, and so sticking to that and honouring that and using that to your advantage is really going to serve you well in creating a nice shot. So yeah, not too much else to say. That I don't think we have a projection test to look at, not that I have up. So yeah, keep working at it. Just constantly check how much rim light you've got versus how much of the full face is being lit based on your light source. Keep stacking back the depth, because I think you can go further with that. But the general levels that you have in here, by the way, are great. I think they're working really well. You just get the right amount of information coming through in the shadows. I think that's working really, really well. That's possibly the most successful of the bunch, actually, in that respect. In all of these shadow areas, you feel like you get a bit of the texture, but it's not overpowering. You can still feel a clear difference between the shadow sides and the lit sides. But there is a bit of that texture and lighting coming through, so it feels like there's a bit of light bouncing around the environment. Yeah, keep updating this and cracking on, and let us know what we can help you with, what we can guide you with along the way. So, Dan, I did a quick sketch for you at your request on the forum, and so just as a quick comparison, so this is what you were looking at, and I know you'd rendered some elements out from view. Apologies, this is a bit soft. I think this is pulled as high res as I could from the forum, but it does look a little bit soft. So this, the main comments that I had with this at this stage were that we could get a little bit more depth in the background. The lighting was working pretty well, but similar to Manu, some of these faces feel like they were catching a bit too much front light, which I think is probably just based on the element you have. But I think when you look at the shadow tones that you have in here that are working quite well, the shadow tones in here feel very lifted, almost like it's quite a front lit element here. So it'd be great to just unify some of your shadow tones. It's nice to have a little bit of difference in them, so it feels like there's some bounce light coming in, but you know, for example, areas like this where you've got a shadow area in here feels very different to the shadow area that we've got in here. So just trying to unify them. And again, as I say, having some difference is nice because you would expect that, you know, with the strong sun hitting some of the rock forms around here, there might be a bit of the warmer light bouncing in. But at the moment they feel almost in two different worlds. So just trying to tie everything together is good. The lighting on things like this all feel very nice. That feels like it's catching the rear backlight just nicely, and the rim lighting on this stuff is all working well. In fact, Manu, that's something like this you could maybe use as a reference, because the rim lighting on this is working really well. Sorry, was that the Pino? That was something that you could use just as a guide, because some of these rock forms feel like they're getting that strong rim light, and then when we fall off to something like this that's almost right in front of the light source, we just go to total silhouette. That's exactly what I was trying to explain with your shot, and I think that's working quite well in this one. The general fall off feels pretty good. As I said, a few more layers of depth just stacking back will serve you well, and again having some of that kind of slightly duskier, darker tones just on the bottom in the horizon line I think will work really well, because it just feels like we drop off to nothing a bit too quickly after some of these layers. Colour-wise, I think this just needs to be brought into one colour space. It just feels a bit like we've got some purpley tones in here, some greener tones, again some purpley shadows in here, some more blue in the shadows here, and then these get quite magenta versus these highlights that are quite orange. I think these are almost too magenta really. So I think just really tying everything together. Now I made some quite big notes on this in the form of a sketch, and I think my main comments were just to try and improve the composition of the overall thing. And actually what I did, I think, was something obviously very rough, just something that I'd roughed out in a lunchtime at work, but it was just to try and get something where we felt that the camera was maybe a little bit higher up, looking down on a wider environment. And actually what I've done here is, in my opinion, still a little bit cramped. I think there's a balance to be found between something like this and what you had that has the nice openness to it. Because I do like the open feel to this, and this got a little bit too cramped. I maybe went a bit overboard, but feeling some of the more of the layers stacking back into the distance against the horizon is good, and just tying all the colours in together. And I based this on the Man of Steel shot, really, looking at that as a reference, but just feeling like while you have colour variation between certain things, you're still keeping the overall colour tones look consistent with each other, both in the shadows and in the highlights, so they don't feel like everything's separate elements that have been joined together. But the main reason I did this compositionally, having things that fall sort of nicely on the thirds is good. So we've got kind of a stronger foreground element on this foreground third, which I think actually could be better. You could have something like this that maybe stacks back and joins onto some of these sort of mid-foreground elements. Might work nicer in the projection. I was just playing with some ideas here, and again something here hugging the frame just to frame it off a little bit. It's just anything we can do to try and help the composition. Just so at a first glance, it looks like a really nice shot. That's kind of where I was going with it. But mostly just using the elements that you were already working up, but just extending them and playing with something that could be a bit more epic and a bit more of a nice establishing heli shot. We don't feel like we're that far up off the ground with this one. I mean, the scale is a little bit hard to read anyway, but because we kind of are never sure when we see something like this how big is this? How big would a human be? Would a human be absolutely tiny in the shot here, or bigger? And I think so. The fact that we're lacking those scale cues in a natural environment like this doesn't help. But anything that we can do to kind of bring some foreground elements back in and then stack up the depth is going to help sell the scale a little bit more. And then, I've just had some areas that fall off into shadow so that it's not totally busy everywhere, because your version was feeling a little bit too busy. Like, we had lots of different elements that all had a lot going on inside them that were all pulled together from different places. Just trying to get a bit more consistency. Now, obviously, I've kind of in some respects, done the easy part by just sketching out a rough idea. Finding photographic elements to fit this now is a tough job, but it's doable, and use anything that you can at your disposal. It seems like you're fairly savvy with view, and we're getting pretty good results with that. So play around with view to create some cool compositions. With the view thing, don't get caught up with the technicalities of it too much. I know, obviously, there are technical issues to be dealt with when you're doing things, and it looked like you guys were working out between you with some help from Dave, some really cool tips to get some improved render times out of your view environments. But try to make sure that although you're thinking about setting up your atmospheres and your fractal terrains and keeping your render times down and all that sort of good stuff, try and make sure that at the core you're still thinking about it as a shot, as an overall composition as well. So that was about it for that. No projection test for this one, so just keep working it up, doing what you're doing. You're getting some good results, and keep pushing it, keep feeding back updates onto the forum, and we'll keep trying to help you. Definitely going in the right direction, and it's good to see those view skills coming in as well. Nice to see someone getting some good results out of that, because I've always found it to be a bit of a headache. But you seem to be doing well with it, so keep it going. Alright, so the only other one that I have here is Marco's last projection test. And this one, again, has had more work done on the projection than on the DMP. It's still kind of sketchy at the moment. But on the whole, I think this is working really well. I think it might be slightly unfair for me to judge this too much on the actual overall look of the image right now, because I know that's obviously at an early stage. But just off the top of my head, very contrasty sky, not too contrasty in the rock structures, and I would expect more contrast in the rocks than the sky. So keep that in mind. You've got it's getting quite deep and dark in the skies, but the rocks are all feeling a little bit lifted. So try and make sure that your sky stays consistent with your rocks. More depth. Go for more depth. This has got the same problem as a couple of the others, where it feels like we sort of stop here and it's the edge of the world. I think stack more stuff back as much as you can, as many layers of depth as you can. 2 or 3 more layers of stuff just disappearing back here is going to just add a whole extra dimension to the work very, very quickly. It's just one of the easiest things that you can do just to really sell depth in the shot, is just to have a few more layers stacking off into the distance, where we just catch different peaks back here that all at slightly different depths with different profiles. I think that's going to really help. We should talk about the camera move. The camera move on this feels really good. It feels like a good speed. You're getting good parallax. Everything feels like it's kind of placed pretty well in the shot. Not too much to say about that. I think it's working really well. The one thing that catches my eye slightly is the element down here. Don't know whether there's something that you could do with that, because it's getting the quite bright light, but it's right on the edge of frame there, and it's got this big dark element next to it. I'm really my eye is drawn down there a little bit. It's almost framed by everything around it, and it's probably not good to have your eye drawn right to the corner of the frame like that. So anything you could do there, just to try and make that feel, even just when you're working this up as a matte painting, just changing the form of it slightly so that more of it is turned away from the light source, so that it's a bit more shadowy, and just catching a few edges would work well. And yeah, there's not loads more to say about this really. I think it's off to a really great start, and the camera move that you have is working really well. It's just going to be a case of finding some really good photographic elements now and working this up. But yeah, I've got quite high hopes for it. I think it's going to work nicely. Obviously, this hasn't got too much lighting, sort of a sense of lighting in it at the moment, but as long as you can keep that feeling all nice and natural, radiating out from that sun, again, I think this is going to feel like a really nice shot. I can see it's quite filmic actually. I can see this really working as quite a cinematic shot. The way that you've got this kind of sunlight reveal, God, it's incredibly similar to something I've been working on in the past couple of weeks. We've got the same thing. We have a foreground element occluding the sun, and then we get a big reveal and the sun flare and everything like that. All that lovely, sexy stuff that looks really cinematic. And yeah, I can really see this working in that respect. I like the fact that we almost see nothing of the background to begin with, because it's covered by this big foreground piece, which is actually very similar to the Man of Steel shot. That's one thing that worked well in the Man of Steel shot, and that's one thing that I think you've managed to emulate really well with what you have here. Getting that nice reveal of the environment is key, and I think you've nailed that. So yeah, I mean, keep working this up. Obviously, the matte painting hasn't really kicked off on this yet. It's still at the sketchy stage, but I think if you can with this camera move, if you can get a matte painting that's working really, really well, then you're going to have a cracking shot. Again, I mean, all of these are really, they've all really got great potential, so it's going to be great to see these all worked up to final. So yeah, do it, use us. We're going to be there to rip it apart and help you put it back together again, because we really want you to have great looking shots at the end of it, and because there's so much potential and people have really shown some skills, and it's great to see how different people are approaching it from different angles, with some from the CG point of view first, and then bringing in the matte painting, and some doing sketching, some using view. It's just really great to see different approaches and how everybody's bringing this up to a finished product. But yeah, I think everybody's doing themselves proud right now, so it's going to be great to see these all finished. So again, use us, get stuff up on the forums, and we'll be there to give feedback and try and help you out. And I hope that's been useful as a kind of a mock daily session. And yeah, we'll see you again soon. Thanks, guys.